Greetings and salutations. This is the voice of Loquacious of Herd, bringing you his Afterthoughts on My Little Pony, Friendship is Magic, Season 6, Episode 16, titled The Times They Are a Changeling. I heartily suggest that you find and watch the episode itself, sans commentary, before proceeding with either this Afterthoughts review or viewing my full reaction, which is hosted at the link in the description. Be warned, this Afterthoughts review will contain spoilers for the episode. And with that out of the way, on to the review. This is an unusual episode in that I suspect my enjoyment of it will change, for better or worse, depending on what comes after. I did enjoy the episode on its own merits. As a standalone story, it's perfectly fine. Further, I am optimistic that the most excellent writers and show staff will cultivate the various seeds of plots, the possible foreshadowing that were planted here. But I won't know for certain until that happens. So diving into the beginning, we start with Twilight, Starlight, and Spike on the train to the Crystal Empire. Some humor, along with Spike doing, well, not quite a humble brag, but bringing up his celebrity status in the Empire as part of his absurd attempts to conceal himself, and that this in turn brings up the reasons for that status. This particular exchange had something of the feel of an exposition dump, which kind of goes against the show-don't-tell rule of thumb for storytelling. But as is later revealed, Spike's being a celebrity is actually an important plot point, and a source of conflict, both internal and external. In the moment, I felt a hint of the old, yes, those of us who watch the show regularly know all this already, kindly move the plot along. But in retrospect, this moment seemed necessary, not just to catch up those who might not follow the show quite so rigorously, but also to establish what would soon be part of the stakes of the conflict. And we get our first hint of problems. The train is empty. That's unusual, but not unprecedented. However, having Starlight and Twilight draw our attention to it starts the episode off with a something's wrong here vibe. This continues with a post-credits exit of the train, and the thematically fitting, but ecosystem-inappropriate tumbleweed. The rare Arctic tumbleweed, I assume. Anyway, moving on. The ponies are all in hiding. Spike doffs his disguise, and is mobbed by joyous crystal ponies who are delighted that he has returned to save the Empire yet again. From the reaction the ponies have to Twilight and Starlight, along with their sudden fear that this might not be the real Spike, the nature of the trouble in the Crystal Empire is now abundantly clear, as if the title alone didn't make it clear enough. There's changelings about, or at least changeling, singular. Again, the show drags out the reveal of the nature of the menace just a touch longer, as Twilight, Starlight, and Spike are stopped by the guards, but this otherwise unnecessary aspect of the episode is, I feel, more about showing the much heightened level of general alert and fear gripping the Empire, so it too gets a pass in my book. And I suspect I only find the slow reveal unnecessary because the title of the episode gave away the nature of the threat to the Empire that has every pony freaking out. So how does one determine the true identity of these visitors? Well, we haven't seen the whole Sunshine, Ladybugs Awake dance in a while, and that's almost as good as a secret handshake between Twilight and Cadence. I say almost as good because it does occur to me that at least one changeling knows about the whole dance thing, and unfortunately that changeling is Queen Chrysalis herself. Assuming she can remember it from when Twilight, thinking she was reuniting with her old foal-sitter, greeted her with that very dance the first time the two met. And here's where we get into part of the whole, depending on what they do later, I may enjoy this episode even more business. We've now got an established means by which Cadence and Twilight believe they could determine if an imposter for one or the other of them is present. But Chrysalis is in a position to also have that information, to either use it herself or to pass it on to one of her minions. I enjoyed how they used the Ladybug dance in this episode, but if it is foreshadowing a time to come, a later changeling plot, where that very dance, believed to be a kind of secure password, is instead used to throw doubt and confusion on which Twilight is which, then I'll like the scene in this episode even more. If such a plot point never occurs, well, I'd find it a missed opportunity for some nice foreshadowing. But back to the point of this episode. There's a changeling that's been sighted in the vicinity. Well, I know I thought I spotted a changeling at the end of the crystalling, and discussed it rather extensively in my review and my reaction, but now ponies around the Empire have begun to spot one. Thus, the current heightened state of security. And even reasons provided to explain why the changelings might well be focusing their intentions here. Post-crystalling, the Empire is unusually full of their choice food, that is love, so the Empire may well be drawing in changelings. Now let me hasten to add that I'm very intentionally using the plural form here, because, again, as they state in the episode, where you see one changeling, how can you tell for sure there aren't more about? Heck, when transformed, it seems that changelings can't even tell one another apart from the ponies they're disguised as, which was why the battle between the main six and the, main 600 wound up being such a royal mess of a fight back in Canterlot Wedding. The changelings impersonating Twilight, Rarity, Fluttershy, Applejack, Pinkie Pie, and Rainbow Dash seemingly couldn't tell the real ponies from the changeling imposters, and spent much of their time and energy battling each other. So, at least one changeling at large. The actual scope and intent of the changeling menace presently unknown. Cadence in shining armor understandably freaking out, and worried about protecting Flurryheart. Twilight and Starlight start work on one of their combined power uber spells, like they did back when they repaired the plot device. The cutie map. Meanwhile, the comically inept Royal Guard wants Spike the Brave and Glorious to assist them. Concern from Twilight. This sounds like a dangerous mission. Overconfidence from Spike. I can think of at least twice he's run from danger in the first season alone, the Ursa and Ghostbusters being one, the Green Dragon's Cave and Owl's Well That Ends Well is another. But then again, he's also been willing to run into danger to help his friends. So, I suppose Spike's courage is the tidal kind. It comes and goes. And kudos to you, gentle viewer, if you get that reference. The episode pivots to follow Spike. With the shift in focus, it became clear to me that while Starlight and Twilight were around, this episode wasn't going to revolve around them. Spike and the guards hit the tundra. Spike, it seems, isn't a tabletop role-playing gamer, and thus is unfamiliar with the mantra, never split the party. After dispatching guards in ones and twos to meet their inevitable capture and replacement by changelings of Chrysalis Brood, to safely and ineffectually hunt for the wayward changeling, Spike himself manages to throw himself down an icy chute and very nearly into an icy crevasse. Spike meets his reflection, only it's not his reflection, but a changeling. Spike's reaction is fear and terror and making with the running of away. Only, icy tundra, nearby crevasse, and poor Spike is one of those wingless dragons. The changeling's warnings come too late, and over the edge goes Spike, only to be rescued, mid-fall, by the aforementioned changeling. Dude's adorable, even if his voice is somewhat less buzzy or insectoid than I was expecting, based on Chrysalis's own speech back in Canterlot Wedding. We get his backstory in flashback, from his delightful hatching amid the swarms of his much more sinister hive brothers and hive sisters, complete with a quite wicked-seeming Chrysalis herself overlooking her new brood, to his participation as a passive observer among his kin at the Battle of Canterlot, to his decision to break from the hive and strike out on his own in pursuit of friendship and love to share, rather than simply to devour. And, of course, he's had little luck in that regard, what with the generally poor, and admittedly somewhat well-deserved, reputation changelings have in Equestria. Thus, his presence in the Crystal Empire. He's starving, and, as theorized earlier, the overflow of love from the crystalling was as magnetic to a hungry changeling as the smell of grilling cheeseburgers would be to a hungry Loquacious. Admittedly, when I'm starving and confronted by a plate full of delicious food, my immediate physical response would be to quietly drool. Changelings apparently snarl and hiss. This is understandably off-putting, and hasn't helped Thorax win any friends. Speaking of that name, no, Thor doesn't wield an axe, he wields a hammer called the Mjolnir. And thus this isn't a botched reference to Norse mythology, but rather a successful reference to biology. A thorax is the part of the body which could loosely be termed the chest, where the legs and wings attach on an insect, and where you find the organs of circulation in other beasties. So, judging from his name, our boy Thorax likely has a lot of heart. He's also a bit depressed and dispirited. Again, quite understandable. The lonely, friendly changeling wants friends, but he needs love to survive. He's trying to find a middle ground where the love he needs to feed on isn't something stolen in a harmful manner from other ponies, but is instead part of the natural outpouring of affection between folks who care for each other. A gift rather than a theft. A shared delight rather than something taken by force. Kudos, Thorax! Unfortunately, there's that whole changeling thing. But Spike the Brave and Glorious will help him become friends with the ponies. Given the issues that hungry Thorax has with carrying on a friendly conversation without snarling and hissing, Spike decides to go broach the subject himself. Spike's attempt at honesty goes poorly. The guards all assume he's joking, and Shining Armor has his own issues with changelings in general. He finds the joke in exceptionally poor taste. And here's where the episode really begins to touch on its moral conflict. It's a moral that's been covered earlier, but one well worth a revisit, namely the dangers of prejudice. In Bridal Gossip, the fear of the unknown led to the whole judging a book by its cover thing. In Luna Eclipsed, scary past behavior led to judging and fear of a pony in the present. Now that we have an individual who was, and in some ways still is, part of a group that is feared and hated, and there are current, active reasons for that fear and hatred. When one tars all members of a reviled group with the same brush, you may well rightly condemn a great many bad apples. What of the occasional good apple in the bunch? What of Matilda's friend Kevin from Slice of Life? Or, now, what of Thorax? So Spike returns with the news that initial forays into winning friends and influencing ponies weren't very effective. So step 2, deception! If the other ponies get to know Thorax as a crystal pony rather than as a changeling, perhaps they'd come to accept him when he drops the disguise. This is a poor plan. It is fraught with difficulties. Odds of success seem slim, though not non-existent. Had Spike consulted Twilight and Starlight, I'm reasonably sure they would have advised against it and sought some other resolution to the problem. But he didn't. As for why, it was clearly because both Twilight and Starlight were caught up with that whole crafting a protective spell thingy from earlier. Cue the introduction of Crystal Hoof to the ponies. And as bad as Spike is at improvisational lying, Twilight is worse at spotting such lies from her trusted friends. So the deception begins. The deception goes well. Thorax hid his body, but let his friendly, humorous personality shine through. He clearly made a very positive impression on all the ponies he met with. When the other ponies weren't seeing a nameless, wicked changeling, a single destructive piece of a terrible swarm of trouble, but rather an individual with a name who they could get to know and feel safe around, they could connect to him and even start to become friends. Unfortunately, the introduction of Flurry Heart didn't go so well. Due to the combination of Thorax's starvation and the changeling proclivity towards snarling and hissing rather than just drooling quietly when exceptional quantities of exceptional quality food was shoved in their faces. Disguise drops, and what looks like a new protective spell is erected around Flurry Heart. Thorax retreats while struggling to apologize and get his hissing under control, and Spike betrays this new friendship by not sticking up for Thorax. Instead, Spike folds before the weight of public opinion. Thorax flees, crushed at Spike's silence, and Spike is left in tears from the act he just committed. Suddenly, all that business at the beginning of the episode about Spike being a celebrity in the Crystal Empire made sense for this episode. It wasn't setting up Spike's celebrity status as being the lever to move the ponies here towards acceptance of a most unusual changeling. It was setting up the stakes, showing us what Spike stood to lose by standing by a new friend in the face of public hysteria, fear, and outrage. And faced with that loss of esteem, Spike had a moment of weakness, unwilling to do the right thing when it meant standing up to every pony else who adored him. But as I mentioned, Spike immediately realized that he had chosen poorly. So Spike sets off to apologize, and we learn that changelings can take the form of inanimate objects. Who knew? I sure didn't. Apology given and accepted, as Thorax saves Spike from yet another fall. And Thorax expresses his understanding, helping Thorax, standing by the changeling's side, and in so doing risking the love and admiration of the populace as a whole, is a very hard thing indeed. but Spike has decided that he is up to the challenge, and he sets off to do so because, having chosen poorly before, he wants to do the right thing this time around. Confrontation Stage 2. Spike and Thorax openly return to the throne room, and Spike proceeds to explain the situation to all present. He does so through song, which, though cool, still manages to leave out some very salient points, namely that this Thorax fellow saved Spike's life on 2 separate occasions, in both cases from nothing more than the goodness of his, heart? Changelings do have hearts, don't they? Regardless, Thorax has heart, in a metaphorical sense, if not a biological one, and it's a kind one. Songs don't fix everything, but this one did help Twilight understand what was going on, and she and Starlight had been pointing out there was a whole mess of furious activity and fight over what seemed to be very little substance. Quite a big ongoing fracas, with only rumor and supposition backing it up. Cadence, earlier, had responded to that assessment with a, "But what else can we do?" In this case, what else could be done is to treat the single individual here as exactly that, an individual. Reasonable protections are good, given prior events, but don't automatically assume the worst based on those past experiences. Thorax isn't Chrysalis, he isn't the Hive, he isn't an army nor the Changeling menace, he's Thorax. Time to find out what it is he actually wants and why he's here. And what Thorax wants is to be a friend, a real friend. Twilight accepts him as such, and that's enough to tip Cadence and Shining Armor to doing so as well. A bit of a sudden resolution, but given that Cadence had already been looking for some way out of the current mess, I'll buy it. Friendship lesson learned, namely, prejudice is bad. A new friend, Thorax the Changeling, has been made and is now living among the crystal ponies. And we fade out. On the whole, an enjoyable episode, particularly the introduction of Thorax the Changeling and the bits of Changeling lore we picked up from the experience. On its own, a pleasant, but not really major or memorable addition to the 6th season. Yet. I say yet because there are things that happened here which could come back and bite the ponies in the plot. Things that could be foreshadowing, setting the stage for a dramatic confrontation with the Changelings somewhere down the line, season finale or season premiere material. One such incident I discussed already, the Ladybug dance as a security measure. So far it's worked perfectly. However, given Chrysalis's prior exposure to it, it might already be compromised. If so, then in the future, that could become a major problem, and this episode's use of that little dance exchange between Twilight and Chrysalis will have been a subtle warning of what is to come. The other incident is the role of Twilight and Starlight in this whole affair. They show up to provide a reason for Spike to visit the Empire, basically vanish through the entire middle act, so they can't even be said to be there to provide a supporting role to Spike, and then they return at the end to toss in their 2 bits for the discussion, and thus help turn the tide of public opinion to a side favorable to Spike and Thorax. None of which, strictly speaking, makes their presence all that necessary from a storytelling perspective. As a result, Spike and Starlight's being in this episode felt to me like it didn't really add anything. Not like, as comparison, how Twilight and Rarity's presence as supporting characters in Gauntlet of Fire added to that episode. Like Gauntlet, this is a Spike story, a Spike and Thorax story, really. To bring Spike into the story, well, given his celebrity status in the Empire, there are any number of ways to get him there. And bringing him in on his own status's merits would even have served to up the emotional stakes for him. If his celebrity status was his ticket into the Empire, and what is keeping him safe and happy there, then to risk sacrificing all of that for a new friend, when he doesn't have the good graces of Twilight to fall back on? That strikes me as a much more powerful statement, one that leads to the same sort of message the episode was clearly trying to send. Cadence could have been the one swayed by Spike alone, and her good word could have done what Twilight's endorsement accomplished with the rest. So, as an amateur storyteller and a student of stories myself, I find myself asking, for this story, why include Twilight and Starlight at all? The only other thing Twilight really did in this episode was to design a spell to protect Flurryheart, a spell which was created in conjunction with Starlight. If I'm not mistaken, this means that the two of them have created a magical warding which is greater than either of them could have come up with on their own. A ward which it seems likely has already been deployed around the infant alicorn. And this magical protection serves no direct purpose in this episode, beyond keeping Starlight and Twilight shuffled off stage for the middle act. The spell wasn't, for example, what caused Thorax to be revealed as a changeling. You see, I'm wondering if one of the things I'm smelling with this Thorax story is the hint of red herring. We know a changeling came to the Crystal Empire at the end of the crystalling, but as Cadence observed, where you see one changeling, what's to say there aren't more? So even if the changeling we saw in the premiere was Thorax, who's to say another one hasn't already been by? If so, then I suspect that the show, with the help of this episode, may be setting us up for that classic changeling story, a kidnapped princess. Perhaps Flurry Heart has already been replaced by a changeling, one slowly feeding off the love of the nation. She could be a new queen, or an old queen in disguise. If she hasn't been replaced yet, then maybe she'll be replaced soon. After all, we now know that the Empire in general, and the baby specifically, are acting as a magnetic, attractive force for changelings. Why would that stop at lone, hiveless changelings? Why not draw in enough for an attempt at a true hive infiltration? Further, if Flurry Heart were somehow replaced, there's little any pony could do to tell. Between the spell suppressing her alicorn magic surges and changeling skill at mimicry, there would be few signs of an imposter that any pony could detect. Well, until now. Thorax, as a changeling himself, would be ideally suited to sense something like the baby-eating love, when as a supposed alicorn she really shouldn't. Likewise, if other changelings are coordinating with a false Flurry Heart, then Thorax, as a friend of the Empire, is again ideally situated to discover some of his old hive mates, or changelings from a rival hive, lurking about the Empire. So, in addition to a new friend and a fun character, Thorax's introduction could very well be the writers whistling nonchalantly as they place a caged canary into the coal mine. Should any of this rambling supposition turn out to be remotely on target, then Flurry Heart, or whatever has replaced her, is currently shielded by a spell that took Twilight and Starlight together to make. Will it take Twilight and Starlight together to break it? And how readily could those two work together if, as per my earlier speculation, there's a false Twilight at large, one who knows the ladybug dance? Now, all of this is, as mentioned before, speculation. But the show has, in the past, dropped mid-season hints about what to expect in the finale. Heck, I'm still shocked that in What About Discord, we see the still wicked Broken Pony Starlight Glimmer spying on Twilight and her friends at the very moment Pinkie Pie is suggesting time travel magic as a means to solve their problems. What had looked to be a throwaway Back to the Future gag was instead foreshadowing the coming conflict for the finale. Heck, it may well have been from observing that particular exchange that Starlight decided to look into the whole time travel thing as a very real possibility for how to get back at Twilight. As I said, I see a lot of intriguing possibilities in the times they are a changeling. A lot of seeds for future conflicts, even for epic confrontations, that could arise from this episode. Perhaps the show won't pursue any of them, in which case this is still a lovely episode with fun new characters, an important moral, plenty of humor, and, on the flip side, some pacing issues, a touch too much exposition for my own taste, though in retrospect I'm not really sure how they could have done that part any better, and a couple of undischarged Chekhov's guns lying about. The pros for me definitely outweigh the cons, and I watch this episode with pleasure. But if the show chooses to pursue any of the aforementioned story and conflict possibilities, then, looking back, I will gain ever greater pleasure from this episode. And to paraphrase the author Gene Wolfe, my definition of good storytelling is that which can be experienced by an educated person with pleasure and re-experienced with increased pleasure. Yes, I like watching My Little Pony Friendship is Magic, and I often enjoy re-watching episodes even more, which makes, in my estimation, Friendship is Magic a very good show indeed. If you wish to see my full reaction to My Little Pony Friendship is Magic Season 6, Episode 16, titled The Times They Are a Changeling, the link, as I mentioned earlier, is in the description. feel free to leave any comments or likes for that reaction here on this Afterthoughts review. And until next time, as always, kindly remember, y'all are awesome. Stay awesome.